we're closing the conference with Rab Andrew, who has managed and continues to manage many illustrious artists and has got a very distinguished career in the Scottish music industry. And one of the things that I really like about the closing Q&A of Wide Days is that I like to have someone from Scotland that's actually going to talk about their experiences of Scotland. And I think so many people moving to London or feeling the need to move to London, it's really interesting to find out as well how you can have a career in music in this country. So that's going to come into it, but I think that really we should start at the beginning and your origins in the music industry, Rab.
I started off as a musician and probably became a field musician, but wanted to work in this business and try and make a living at it. So I moved. I thought the idea that managers probably could work until they were 60, and whereas musicians tend to have a shorter life, unless they get really lucky and Paul McCartney or something, you know. So that was the sort of basic start to it. So to get into that, we started a small studio, which was around about punk time, when punk music was about. And we were very fortunate. We used to get a lot of young punk bands because the Savage studio, of which Brian was a pal of mine, were a bit more for musos. And we wanted to get into just let bands come in, have the experience of recording, and then go out again. Most of them scraped together the money from gyro checks and didn't really have, if it was £100 for a recording session and they come in with £70, we used to never hold back the CD it was a cassette in these days. We'd hold back the cassette and say, you know what, we'll give you the cassette when you pay the other 30. We used to let the £70 go and thought, if they're really keen and they want to come back, they'll come back. But I didn't want to lose somebody out of our sort of small business just because we'd added VAT on or we had to do something like that. So we just wanted to treat folk a bit more like human beings. And we blossomed really well out of that. And we were lucky to be in Glasgow at a time when lots of bands from like Lloyd Cole and Hipsway, Bourgeois, bands you might not know, but people that Tam and Bruce will know very well. And it made Glasgow a really thriving scene at the time. And we were quite happy to grow up in that. That was the side where we felt we were delivering all the recordings for bands that managed to get deals, and yet we felt as though maybe we should be in the management side. We were trying to get into the cradle to the grave business. We wanted to try and see if we could get the band at the early days, make them up to a certain standard. Obviously, the band's got to be a certain standard. We have not got any magic, but you have the ability to hopefully pick things and see something you think is good and you believe in it. And if you believe in it, then you wake up in the morning and you're quite happy to go and work for it. If you don't believe in it, it becomes hard work and you should really let it go at that point. But we were fortunate, we got that through, and we got through to record companies. We took 3 bands on, which was Texas, Gun, and a band called Slide. And we were very fortunate Texas and Gun, had a career out of it. And that's really where it started from. And once you start learning and gaining knowledge, you can start cutting a few corners. But it doesn't give you any magic, At the end of the day, new bands will come through, and it's a band that will become big. It's not the manager. If you look out there at the amount of managers around the whole world who have got several successful acts, there is not many. So the manager does get quite lucky sometimes by having the right band. And that can make a manager look good. But, a manager also can't make too many mistakes. And the bands don't expect you to make any mistakes. So it's a tough one, And you're dealing with people who usually start off as being close friends. And when things go horribly wrong, you can become the worst enemies, And that side of it's quite sad as well, can happen.
How did you choose the bands that you started to work with? I mean, what made you select those 3?
Well, this is where it takes out of being a creative business. So we analysed what we thought was doing business at the time. We thought there was, the Pretenders were probably getting a wee bit older, and we just thought that, a female-fronted act could do good business. We thought that rock bands will always do business because, kids will go through the age of puberty and they'll always want that sort of metal-y feel or something hard-edged that would get them through that age of their life where they don't have a job, they don't have any money, but they're determined to make their mark in life, So that we always thought, and then we wanted a kind of young sort of boy band who, were talented enough but would appeal to young girls. And that was the slide element, and Gun was obviously the rock band, and Charlene in Texas was that. So we went out with these 3 bands, and we got the 3 bands within about 3 months, and we were very fortunate to get all 3 of them signed. But the business was a different business then. There was a lot of money about. The CD was just been invented. There seemed to be, the record company had more money than they knew what to do with, because all of a sudden from getting £4 for a vinyl, they were getting 11 quid for a CD, which was huge profits for them. So there was a lot of money about, and that, I suppose, was a fun time to be in it.
Were those bands already together when you found them then?
No. Well, Gun was a band, and there was a couple of members in it that changed. Charlene was not. Charlene was working in the hairdresser, but had such drive, and she knew what she wanted. And she's a very driven person, and still is a very driven person. And Johnny was in Hipsway at the time, and wasn't too happy with it. So we just linked him up as a songwriter and Charlene together. And, they've been a partnership for years, and they've worked for years, and, they've had good success, and they still remain to be, close pals.
Did you have any influence at all in the image as well then? Because I remember one thing that struck me with Gun was that they were playing rock, but they were the first guys I ever encountered playing rock that had short hair.
Well, we wanted to break that mold. Gun rock bands at the time. When we first saw, I went to Kirkintilloch Town Hall to see Gun playing, and they were called Phobia, and they appeared on stage all with various colours of spandex trousers, which was the kind of rock thing that people did in these days, And we brought them in, and we really wanted them. We wanted to take the James Dean look, almost, of. I think to find fashion or style, it's nice to be timeless. Bay City Rollers obviously went through a phase. I don't think that maybe is going to come back, But I still think there's the chance that obviously Marlon Brando, James Dean, Lauren Bacall, these images are very, very strong. And of course, if young people can come across and you're almost mimicking success, so you're already tying yourself to something that has a branded image that stands. So that was the sort of logic of thinking of that. So Gun came in, and I remember I went out and we got them, to buy 501 jeans that were all ripped, bikers jackets, James Dean or Marlon Brando would have had in the Wild One, and that was the kind of rock image we wanted them to. We wanted them to look like that kind of side.
I can't believe that they used to wear spandex. That's hilarious, because I can remember actually picking up on the fact that they just didn't look like your usual 80s rock band.
Well, it was hard at first because people went against them. At first, the rock thing went against them. We didn't pick up the right press at the start. There was a case of, this isn't right. You can't mess with the system. We were, and that was tough. So on the first album, we found ourselves stuck in a really awkward place. We weren't taken seriously by the rock folk, and we weren't taken that seriously by more, alternative folk. So it was a tough place to be. But I do believe if you can stick that out, you can carve yourself a little, piece of action in there. So nothing's worse than, you go to Hollywood and you watch one disaster movie. You know what? Successful 10 disaster movies. They're all panicking now because the artist is such a successful film. The laws of average is we're going to have 10, silent films now, just because that's what business has historically made money at, so we'll copy it. And so we've always tried to work away from that, but it does work. It goes against you so many times, you know. Primal Scream, even, not that we were involved in the very early days, they had a feeling of they weren't warm to the press at first. You know, they had a real. And it wasn't until they clicked on from being a rock band to doing, you know, getting the dance element into it. You know, did it really sort of start to click for them? You know, so what I'm saying is, I suppose that in any band starting out just now, no matter how you calculate it, it's better to try and find something original than to be a Mark II of something, you know. And at least if you're going to fail, you're going to fail doing your own thing and not going to be because you were the second-rate version of the original thing, you know, which is...
And I mean, how important do you think this image side of things is? I mean, I have to admit that, you know, and I do get criticized for it, but sometimes I go and see bands and it looks like their mothers dressed them. And you can't help thinking that really if that's the best you can do, like a sort of Marks and Spencer polo shirt and, you know, a pair of Nike trainers or something, then, you know, maybe you should just kind of give people your CD, you know?
Yeah, well,
or play behind the
yes,
screen.
it should be just about music. There's no denying it. But I'm afraid we live in a very cynical world out there where people will come out and are really quick to try and knock things down. So you try and protect it as much as, you know, you're putting on armor almost when you're putting on whatever you're... So people like to go and see a band and first of all, they'll judge the music, they'll judge the visuals, you know, they'll judge an attitude thing, you know. And we prejudge things so quickly, and especially in the UK, you know, where we probably have destroyed as many acts as we've created. In fact, it's the reason I think America is finding it so easy to conquer the world just now is because we're probably the second best producer of music in the world. We're out there too busy having a small internal war, you know, we are not really communally supportive of anything. Anything that rises up gets slaughtered, you know. So that's tough, you know. But you know what? That sometimes hardens you up and you move on anyway. But that's why in America, you know, bands who move forward, they get people cheer for them. It's great. And that's why, you know, I'm afraid they're going to beat the pants off us. In the next few years, I think, just now, unless we have a change. And I don't know if we're producing international product either. You know, I think we're maybe producing quite regional stuff. It's almost like, you couldn't say it was folk music, but it's stuff that might not travel. It might not travel out of Glasgow. It might not travel out of Edinburgh. It might not travel out of Scotland. It might not, you know. It all depends on the degree that you can make that music to go. And yet you can't go and make music completely like it's a science, you know. It is an art form. We hope we'll be creative. And most of the creative things come out of when times are really tough. So I'm quietly hopeful that, I mean, I'll be at an age where I won't be around, you know, I won't probably work in this. It's a certain age you don't want to go by still working. There's young kids out there who will have that vision. And that vision will be for a big bad world, not just to impress the folk in the local street or the local pub or the West End of Glasgow or something. You know, it will be a vision for the world. And these folk will come through, you know. And I'm quite confident they'll be there. You know?
Do you think this is something, and I mean, you're based in Glasgow, and one of the things that interests me a lot is you have so many bands from Glasgow, or that live in Glasgow, let's put it that way, that have become successful. And there's always been bands from Edinburgh that have been great, but never really seemed to rise above being a kind of cult thing or something that's kind of appreciated in certain circles. And is that hunger is that stronger in Glasgow, do you think? Or is that kind of ambition that bands in Glasgow want to be commercially successful as well as critically acclaimed, a driving force?
Do you know, I don't know, that's a hard one to answer because individuals are, if you take certain people in there, And Bruce will verify this. Jim Kerr is a very driven guy. Charlene's a very driven woman. That doesn't take anything to do with where they live, where they stay, or what they hang out. I think that's in you. People can be, I've got that. There's something in there. What makes Paul McCartney still go out and make records just now? It's nothing to do with it, he needs the money. It's because he's driven himself all his life that he can't stop now. And even if it's not the greatest thing, he's got to do it, because it's like retiring or something, When you've had that drive to see you through life, it's very hard. Now, what happens to a lot of bands is that they get a certain level of success and they start believing in themselves. And when you start believing in yourself, you're over. Because you've reached a certain target, and you've reached a happiness, and you start to behave differently, and you're not a winner anymore. You start thinking that people should be respecting you, and that's why Americans are amazing at that side. They actually never reach that level. They are always, always hungry, even for the next move, the next move, the next move. It's been driven into them with this, maybe pure capitalism or something. I don't know.
Do you advise your bands on that? Is there a way of coaching your musicians in that way that, once, if they get a #1 album, they should continue just to behave like reasonable people? Or, is there actually a way of doing that?
You can always tell folk, but Rod Stewart said it's amazing how your attitude changes when you've got a few bob. And I think that happens, and you can't, you become. There's a story I heard recently about the Lady Gaga new record, and it came. The A&R guy went up to the house. She'd played the new album, and the A&R guy said to her, "I think you're 3 songs short of a great record." He was sacked within the week, So when somebody reaches that level, they don't really want to listen to what you've got to say, apart from good stuff. So they surround themselves with yes people. And the yes people are very happy to do it. They're usually on a wage, they're getting paid. Fantastic, I'll do this. And everyone's so happy, as long as it sells. And if it doesn't sell, then they disappear off, the wages drop off, and that's the way it goes. There are not many folk out there. Maybe someone like a Clive Davis can take someone aside and tell them, this is wrong, you're doing this wrong, and they'll maybe listen. But most folk, as they go up, they will stop listening. And we're all guilty of that. There's probably a point where I felt dead confident about something, and someone will say, no, you should be doing this. I go, no. And we're all capable of being idiots.
Because I remember you saying when we did our panel Go North a couple of years ago that you don't have contracts with your artists. Now, if you've gone in there and you've told them something that they don't necessarily want to hear, then presumably they can just sack you.
Of course.
How do you manage that? Does it require certain diplomatic skills, or have you got any examples of occasions where you've had to go and break something particularly delicate? Or have you ever heard an album by one of your acts where you've gone, oh my God, this is terrible, we can't release this?
Well, you try and do your best, I don't know how you say that. I think sorry? Yeah, yes. Christina Joe. No, I think we've been fairly honest. There are some times where the artist becomes bigger than the manager is sometimes bigger than the artist. And you can open your mouth when you're in a different position. When you are the dominant force, you tend to open your mouth a lot more. And that doesn't mean to say you're talking a lot of sense. Sometimes you can be talking as much. And sometimes you've got to listen to new artists. New artists have got some great ideas, and they're fresh, and they're not tainted with the same logical thinking that we have. We sometimes paint by numbers, which is, gets you through certain hurdles, but it doesn't make you a new creative source. I've also found that every plan, you try a plan twice on 2 artists, it never works the second time. And you can't analyse why it hasn't worked. So you've got to try and find something that's a bit different. Every time you do it, it's going to be that wee bit different. And you might win, you might lose, but that's the fun of it. And I think that's what keeps you going as well. You know, it keeps it. I still wake up in the morning very excited about things, and I still wake up in the morning very depressed about things. You know, no different than any other person in this room probably. When things are going great, it's a fantastic feeling. When things are going bad, it's hellish. You know, but
what sort of kept you going then? I mean, if you had you say with the example of Gun, you were going through this phase where, you know, the rock press hated them, but then they weren't appealing to the other people either. I mean, I really liked them, but I can remember people taking the piss out of me for it.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
it's, you know, not that I cared, but the point is that, you know, if you're working with this act, you've got this vision and you're getting this abuse from all quarters. I mean, how do you deal with that? What kind of spurs you on? Do you just ignore it?
Well, I think you have to, because if you aren't thick-skinned, you know, there's an old sort of thing, you read reviews, you know, and you can have 10 reviews, you can have 9 good ones, and like Billy Connolly always said, the bad one sticks in your head. For some reason, it sticks in your head, and it's hard to believe how. So the people who survive are the ones who go over that, you know. If you don't go over it, then, you know, you're weak, and you're probably not going to survive the game anyway, you know. So it's a tough game, especially when it comes to your personality or something, or something. And anything you do is very personal, you know. So when folk criticise something that's personal to you, you become a slightly different animal. You run away and hide, or you become even more aggressive, you know. And that's.
Where do you fit into that? I mean, I've always thought you were a total gentleman, but you're not exactly hiding either. I mean, you're sitting on a stage.
No, you know, you evolve into a slightly different animal as you move on. I could never, you know, 30 years ago, I could never see myself fully doing it properly. I saw myself as slightly as a businessman. I saw myself more as I could run a tight ship. I knew how to make numbers work. I wasn't erudite in any way, and still I'm not. But I could see that you could have fun in a business that was exciting to be in, and I played, you know, as a kid. So it was always an ambition to be still involved in it. You know, if you play football as a kid, you want to be involved in football. You know, if you just want to be driven in what you inspires you, you know, and it's been fun, you know.
Do you still have a studio as well then?
We have the studio now, but it doesn't work. The studios really went through a bad time recently. They've probably gone through a resurgence just as studios, because this is diversifying a wee bit here, but I think the music business now has become almost like golf or something, you know, whereas most folk probably own a guitar. Most folk probably want to play. Most folk reach a certain level at playing. Most folk probably want to go and do some kind of recording. The Americans had it about 10 years ago. It was a big growth business. They called them weekend warriors in America, where there were people who had a job during the week, but took it serious, you know, the same way that golf is, you know. And so there's a lot of folk recording, there's a lot of folk playing, and it's a wee bit of the gold rush for the retail business more than it is for the individual. The individual will go out and spend some of his wages and things on equipment, studio, and they say the old line of the gold rush is the only folk that made any money in the gold rush was the folk selling the picks and the shovels. So I think there's a wee bit of that sort of business around just now in the music business now.
Are you finding, though, that you've got these old geezers coming into your studio then? Is that what you're saying?
Well, at the time, for a while, we come out of the studio business when it got quiet, to be honest, and we rented the studio out to someone else, and, you know, Paul McGeechan took it on and had sort of time in that. But now with technology, you know, the recordings can be made from your house. You know, they can read at any level you want. They're as clever as you are. You know, so the equipment's phenomenal.
You've seen this sort of evolution. One of the things that interests me, and this is one of the things that was touched on in the A&R panel yesterday, is that you have people have access to this equipment. They can make recordings of a quality that would have cost them thousands of pounds, but there is still there's still no getting away from bad vocals when they're bad vocals. So even though everything sounds great and polished, if your singer's not learned to sing properly, that's still gonna stand out. I mean, is there a role for studios and producers in that respect? I mean, that you still need those people that are going to actually coach the artists.
Well, it's all about ideas, I think. You know, some of the best songs or pop songs are sung by people who are not great singers. You know, in fact, most of the commercial songs that cross over fully, you know, a lot of them are sung by pretty normal singers. You know, so I don't think it's being the best of anything. It's more of the visual and the idea you have. I think, you know, I feel quite strongly about that. Some folk come in with a great idea, and the ideas are, you'll always get great players, you'll always get great singers, but you don't always have great ideas.